Billy stood in front of the old-fashioned yet elegant two-story house, his individual first listing as a real estate agent. It exuded that special kind of charm with its quaint exterior and vintage wooden fittings. He stood for a moment staring at the enlarged photo of himself on the advertisement for the property. His long blonde hair had been styled to look just a little feminine, and staring at it now, at 3 times life size, he felt pleased with the final outcome. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled slightly musty but not unpleasant, carrying with it the echoes of countless old memories embedded within the walls. Billy surveyed the rooms, mentally noting what needed tidying up and adjusting for prospective buyers. As he moved about the house, his mind wandered, weaving intricate daydreams of what life might have been like for the former residents within these walls. He had always liked playing house as a kid. Finally, he made his way to the kitchen, and here he drew a breath. It was easily the most beautiful and central room in the house. As he stood there, fingers idly caressing the mosaic bench top, he couldn't help but thinking about the lady of the house. Was this her favorite room? Did she love her life as a housewife? Many, many years ago, before the complexities of modern-day living? "Here's to you, lovely housewife lady," he said with a smile and playfully did a mock spin around the room. That's when it happened. There was a rush of wind and he felt his suddenly full of glitter. He lost his balance for a moment. He blinked and suddenly found himself not in his own skin, but that of lovely, graceful housewife straight out of a 1950s sitcom. His tailored suit had been replaced by a floral apron and a pale pink full-skirted knee-length dress, complete with matching shiny pink heels. As he stood in the kitchen, the aroma of a hearty dinner wafted through the air. Confusion mingled with disbelief as he glanced down at his attire, the soft fabric of the apron brushing against his fingertips. "What the hell?" he cried, and soon after let out a cry as his hand shot to his lips. The voice coming out of him was softer and high-pitched than that of a young woman. And a young woman who was clearly not used to saying the word hell at that. He stared down at the apron, the frilly edges contrasting sharply with the modern life he was accustomed to. Yet there was a strained comfort in the old-fashioned familiarity of the scene before him. His gaze drifted to the kitchen table, where a pair of vintage salt and pepper shakers stood sentinel over the neatly set table. A large stew was bubbling away happily on the stove. The kitchen, which was dusty and musty a few moments ago, had been magically restored to its former homeliness. As he moved about the kitchen, his hands instinctively following the motions of meal preparation, Billy couldn't shake the surrealness of it all. How was this possible? Was he dreaming? As he stirred the pot on the stove, Billy couldn't help but wonder what his life would have been like in this era. Would he have been content playing the role of the dutiful housewife, tending to the needs of his husband and home? Husband? The word sent a sudden jolt through him. Billy barely noticed the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. He turned, his heart skipping a beat as he laid eyes on his husband, a dapper gentleman straight out of a 1950s magazine ad. 6 feet tall with short, cropped hair, the man had long, strong fingers that easily found their place around Billy's waist as he bent to take in the aroma of the stew. "Betty, dinner smells Betty sat at the dinner table opposite her husband. A whirlwind of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Excitement bubbled up within her like a fizzy champagne. The soft glow of candlelight cast a romantic aura over the room, illuminating Betty's features and accentuating the vintage elegance of her attire. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she caught her husband's gaze, his eyes twinkling with affection and admiration. Her heart thumped in her chest as she watched the handsome man across the table serve her and hand back the plate with a warm smile. "You look a little flushed, honey. Are you okay?" he asked, concerned but with a slight teasing tone to his voice. "I'm fine, darling, just a little tired." The man across from her nodded, pouring wine into her glass. "Maybe you need to relax a little, my Betty," he said with a wink. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she caught her husband's gaze, his eyes twinkling with affection and admiration. In that moment, she felt beautiful, cherished, and utterly desired. The air buzzed with the electricity of newfound love. Betty couldn't help but giggle at her husband's charming antics, her heart fluttering like a butterfly as they enjoyed the warm meal in their home. When dinner was done, with a soft smile, her husband rose from his seat and crossed the room to the vintage record player nestled in the corner. The strains of a familiar melody filled the air, wrapping around them. Without a word, he extended his hand to Betty, a silent invitation to dance. She stood delicately and walked over to the man. "My beautiful wife," he murmured as his hand went warmly around her waist and with a deft movement slid her apron off. He tossed the garment onto the table and smiled at Betty. "Do a little spin for me, darling. Let me see you." Betty felt her head spin. Memories of her previous gender seemed to slip away as she made her now slender and petite frame spin slowly for her husband, the full skirt swirling around her knees as her pink heels clicked slowly on the wood-paneled floorboards. "My goodness, you are a dish, my darling." His voice was low and husky, filling Betty with warmth in her tummy. And with that, he reached for her and spun her in his arms in time with the music. With each step, Betty started to feel more and more comfortable in her own skin, embracing the role of the woman and of the wife of this gorgeous man. Lost in the music and the arms of her husband, Betty surrendered herself to the moment, relishing in the simple joy of being alive. In this fleeting moment, she was no longer Billy, the nervous real estate agent, but Betty, the radiant housewife, dancing her way through time with the man she loved. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the dream faded. There was another rush of wind and dizziness, and Billy once again found himself in a musty but beautiful empty kitchen, all alone in an old-fashioned home. "What on earth?" he cried, and this time the voice he heard was distinctly more masculine. Gone was the apron, the full-skirted dress, and the heels, and he was back in his boring suit. Billy barely had any time to savor his disappointment when there was a firm knock on the door. It was his client. Pushing back the memories, he rushed to the door and flung it open. Reaching for his well-practiced lines, he called out, "Brown and Smith Real Estate, good morning." "Good morning," the man at the door said with a smile. Billy felt his jaw drop to the floor. It was the man from his dream, his husband. For a moment, Billy could not move or speak. The man stood there with his short cropped hair and 6-foot-tall frame, waiting expectantly. "I'm Charles," he said finally and held out his hand with a smile. "Betty," Billy called out without thinking and extended his own hand. Charles chuckled and stepped inside. "That's a lovely name, Betty." Billy looked flustered, watching the man step through the house and start looking around. "Sorry, I mean William, but you can call me Billy. Everyone else does." Charles looked back and laughed and gave a little wink. "Okay, but you look like Betty to me."